From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
This week, powerful testimony on Capitol Hill urging lawmakers to pass tougher gun laws.
Violence is a big problem. Too many children are dying.
Former U.S. Representative Gabby Giffords, whose life was forever changed by a shooting 2 years ago, speaking before a hushed and packed hearing room about gun control. Her former congressional colleague, Jim Langevin, also had his life forever altered by a bullet. But can advocates of stricter gun laws, like Langevin and Giffords, out-influence the powerful gun lobby? Plus, just when you thought the fiscal cliff hype was over, you're now getting assaulted by words like sequestration and debt ceiling. Another budget battle brewing in Washington. Our guest this week on Newsmakers, United States Representative for Rhode Island's 2nd Congressional District, Jim Langevin.
Good morning. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the panel, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and political reporter for Rhode Island Public Radio, Ian Donis. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Congressman, good morning and welcome back to the program.
Morning, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
Let's start with gun control. You, along with 4 other members of Congress, are urging your colleagues to bring someone affected by gun violence to the President's State of the Union later this month. Who are you bringing?
Jim Tyrell from Providence. His sister was murdered in Providence, sadly, about 9 years ago. She was behind a storefront counter at her job, and as I understand, was killed in a gun attack. There's obviously far too much violence through weapons that are used in our society, and I believe something has to be done to keep guns out of the hands of criminals or those that have been determined to be have mental health issues that would prevent them from owning a weapon. This is a serious issue, and obviously the tragedy, the terrible act of violence that took place in Newtown, Connecticut, is another example, the latest example of how something has to be done to change the way things are right now. I certainly respect the Second Amendment and support it, and most of the gun owners or gun dealers in this country dealing with weapons are law-abiding citizens, but there's clearly a problem that too many guns are getting into the wrong hands, and we're looking to change course.
I want to talk to you about that mental health issue that you brought up. Rhode Island is just one of 4 states that does not participate in the FBI's database where they put in names of those who are mentally ill or criminals. It's called the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, but for many, even gun supporters, it's silly that we don't participate in that. Were you aware of that, and what are you doing to address it, if anything?
Well, I am aware of that, and I certainly would encourage our state to look at joining the effort to report that data to this national database. And I'm uncertain as to the reasons as to why.
So
we're
no
not
one's told you this is why we don't put in?
No, but we should relook at that, and I'd like to see Rhode Island participate. But I leave that, of course, to state leaders to determine. That's going to be something that would be handled at the level of the legislature. And I certainly would be glad to reach out with and speak with both the Speaker and the Senate President to see what the appropriate change could be to see Rhode Island participate. One of the things I would clearly like to see is more information sharing on this level, so that, because it doesn't make more sense for one state to have stronger gun laws and another state not, or reporting and not being able to have that information widely available. It's no good to have a strict system in one state, and then you could go across the lines and acquire a weapon where you might be able to be you'd be precluded from getting that weapon in another state.
Congressman, some opponents of gun control interpret the Second Amendment to mean that Americans should be able to own guns as a counterbalance to federal power. How do you read the Second Amendment?
Well, I believe that law-abiding citizens have the right to bear arms. But when you look at the types of weapons that we see on our streets right now, it's one thing to have weapons for home defense or for hunting purposes or recreational sports shooting, target shooting, if you will. But the kind of weapons, of course, that I'm concerned about are assault weapons, these multi-round gun clips that would be used in these weapons, of course, 30 or 100 rounds of ammunition that could be held. And these are weapons of war, and they don't have any more business being on our streets than an Army tank. So I believe that we need stricter gun laws in that respect, as well as making sure that we have universal background checks, so that if someone is buying a weapon, that they go through a background check, making sure that they're not in one of those categories of individuals, a criminal or someone with mental health issues that would be precluded from owning a weapon. And by the way, one of the things I'm trying to do is to keep this issue front and center. As we mentioned earlier in the program, I'm organizing my colleagues, asking them to use their one State of the Union ticket to invite someone from their district or from their state around the country that somehow has been affected by gun violence. And this is hopefully will continue to keep the pressure on Congress to take action on these issues.
Well, speaking of your colleagues, one of the challenges facing Democrats in passing gun regulation is that not everyone comes from a safe seat like yourself. There are many Democrats who come from the South and West where there's a lot more support for owning guns. How do you get your Democratic colleagues in those other parts of the country to support the kind of measures you're talking about when it's a tougher political vote?
Sure. Clearly, it's going to take a lot of discussion and trying to find some kind of middle ground on this issue that some of our colleagues, who are in tough districts, would accept. And by the way, it's not just a Democratic issue; it's Democratic, Republican. It really should be something that is bipartisan. We should all have an interest in keeping guns out of the wrong hands. For the life of me, I don't understand why even the NRA would be opposed to universal background checks. We should want to be working together to keep guns out of the wrong hands. As I said, most of the people that do own weapons are law-abiding citizens. But for those that aren't in those categories that are allowed to have a weapon, we should make sure that they can't get them.
It's sounding like background checks could be a place for compromise. Paul Ryan, the Republican vice presidential nominee who serves with you in the House, says he would consider that, and other Republicans in the Senate have discussed it. But one question I've had about that is, Adam Lanza never bought a gun, as I understand it. His mother owned those guns. And would a background check have prevented Adam Lanza from getting a gun since he never bought it, by all accounts, so far?
Well, if he obviously tried to purchase one, it would have precluded him from getting his hands on a weapon. But again, we cannot prevent every incident of gun violence where it would occur, or perhaps even everyone who wants to get a weapon from getting one. This is about managing risk to the greatest degree possible, closing that aperture of vulnerability, if you will, so that we, to the greatest degree possible, we prevent those who are not legally able to have a weapon, that we prevent them from getting it. I can't predict that, or wouldn't begin to say that we're going to be able to prevent every type of gun accident or gun issue from getting into the wrong hands, but we have to try. We have to take some kind of action, because the status quo isn't working, and too many people are dying, especially what we saw in Newtown. It should outrage everyone.
If Congress passes a background check law this year, do you think that will be enough?
It's not enough. It's a step in the right direction. That really all it is at this point is it would be a further step in the right direction, trying to again manage this risk and reduce the vulnerability. But we have a problem in this country where we're seeing too many of these mass shootings taking place, and the president has made clear that we just sitting by and not taking action isn't acceptable. That we have to move forward. We have to take some type of action to prevent these things from happening again.
All right, gentlemen, let's shift gears here. The national unemployment rate, excuse me. We taped this program on a Friday, and they announced this morning that the unemployment rate ticked up to 7.9%. We have had a gloomy economic report this week that showed the nation's GDP actually shrank at the end of 2012, and dysfunction in D.C. over budget issues is just dampening confidence. Uncertainty seems to be holding back employers on hiring, or that's what I'm reading. Do you think people are right to blame Congress for that?
Well, let's look at, first of all, the unemployment issue. Nationally, there were over 150,000 jobs that were added. The economy contracting a bit was directly, most likely a result of cuts in federal spending. Mm-hmm. So it was economists are saying sort of a one-time cutback, if you will, in the growth of the economy. It could, of course, there could be further reductions in growth if there's further deep cuts in federal spending. we clearly have to get our fiscal house in order, and there will be some, along with, I would like to see additional revenue brought to the table so that we can afford to do the things that
What does additional revenue brought to the table mean?
Well, it means closing loopholes, for example, on major corporations that aren't paying anything in taxes right now. Certainly they're parking their money overseas, and in many cases are paying zero in taxes to the federal government. And I think that that's wrong. I believe that corporations should pay their fair share. Just like everyone has to contribute. We have a great, strong country, but it does take money to make sure that it's operating. We're living in a civilized society, and when you have major corporations that are paying zero in taxes, or you have oil and gas companies that are getting billions of dollars in tax credits and incentives, when they're making record profits hand over fist, that something in our tax code is clearly out of balance. So a rebalancing of our tax code, making sure that we are that corporations are paying their fair share, and we're not giving away tax breaks to oil and gas companies that don't need them. I think that's important. The other thing that I would like to see is a rebalancing of our tax code, so that we, instead of incentivizing businesses to move jobs overseas, which is currently the case, that we have a tax code that incentivizes job creation back here at home. Remember, all of the fiscal challenges that we are facing right now will be significantly lessened if we have people back to work. We create jobs, we get people back to work, and obviously people paying income tax revenue when they are working. But they're not doing that if they're out of work.
You touched on it, sequestration, $1.2 trillion in mandatory cuts to federal programs coming in March. Half of that money would come from military programs. What would the impact of that be on Rhode Island's naval industry, especially in Aquidneck Island? Will we see layoffs?
Well, we very well could, and that's what I want to make sure that we avoid. I don't want to see sequestration go into effect. What that means is that there would be across-the-board cuts in both defense spending as well as discretionary non-defense spending, and those cuts would be deep. But the problem is the sequestration is not a good way to budget, because you're treating your top priorities the same as your lowest priorities. We need to have targeted.
Well, you voted for it in the Budget Control Act of 2011. That was part of it, this ticking time bomb. Do you regret voting for that?
No, because we have to do something to get our fiscal house in order. What I want to see is, and what I expected the super committee to do, is to do targeted, focused spending on programs that either aren't working or where there's duplication of programs, things that we just simply can't afford, so that we prioritize our spending. And instead of just cutting for the sake of cutting, I think that we also need to make sure that we're spending, we're getting return on investment. So, for example, investing in infrastructure, investing in education. Those are areas that are going to create jobs, or they're going to make sure that we have an educated workforce to do the jobs that we need done. And by the way, that skills gap is another thing that I'm focusing.
Before we get off sequestration, I want to ask you, it looks like it's going to take effect. I know you say you don't want it to, but that doesn't mean it won't here in the minority. March 1st is the deadline, and there's more and more reports that Republican senators saying, you know what, we're just going to have to take this. So is there anything that can be done if the sequestration takes effect to lessen the impact on Rhode Island?
Well, if sequestration takes effect, again, it's going to be across-the-board cuts, and they're going to affect programs that I have been fighting to see strengthened. For example, the Virginia-class submarine program, which is vitally important to our national security. It's also important to our job economy here in Rhode Island.
Electric boat.
Yeah, electric boat, and there's other areas of the defense industry that Rhode Island is a part of, and I'm concerned certainly that could be affected. We still have approximately a month to go before sequestration would go into effect. I would imagine if we were close to a deal on reaching a responsible budget, so that it's not just across-the-board cuts, but targeted, focused spending cuts and additional revenue on the table, which President Obama has made clear that for every dollar in cut in spending, that there would be additional revenue that has to be on the table. If we're close to something like that, I'm sure that March 1st date could be adjusted, but kicking the can down the road and not seeing any real progress or not envisioning any real progress isn't sufficient. It's not acceptable. We have to get our fiscal house in order to give certainty to our business community and put our economy on the right track.
All right, gentlemen, we are long overdue for a break. Our guest this week is U.S. Congressman Jim Langevin. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. To my right, I'm joined by Ted Nesi and Ian Donis. Our guest this week is Congressman Jim Langevin. Ian.
Congressman, I believe it was back in 2011 when you expressed support for same-sex marriage. That was before President Obama. Senator Jack Reed came to that position last year. So do you see a role for yourself now, as there's a lot of attention on the state Senate here in Rhode Island and the question of whether it will approve same-sex marriage?
Well, I came to the conclusion after hearing from many people that, again, separate but equal is not equal. And so it just made sense to me in terms of ensuring equal protection under the law that we should make the change to allow for same-sex marriage in Rhode Island. And the House obviously just passed that very strong vote from the House of Representatives, and the state Senate is now poised to take up the bill in the very near future. This is something that each individual has to decide for themselves, but I certainly would expect and would like to see that that passed in the state Senate, and I know the governor would sign it into law.
Have you, or will you encourage Senate President Teresa Pavlidis, Judiciary Chairman Michael McCaffrey, a fellow Warwick fellow, or any other senators to vote in favor of same-sex marriage?
Well, I've already spoken out on the issue, and I wrote an op-ed back in March 2011 as to the reasons why I thought the change should be made in Rhode Island. But I respect the individual decisions of the senators and the representatives in the Rhode Island legislature, and I leave that to them to take up.
You voted for the Sandy relief package, injecting about $60 billion in aid for states affected by that storm, but you did so begrudgingly because funding for fisheries was stripped and some other elements. But I want to focus on that because the fishing industry, by any metric, was a disaster well before Sandy was in the forecast. So what do you say to people who criticize your support for such an amendment to the relief package, saying it was just shoehorned in and trying to take advantage of a disaster?
Well, these are two areas where they're hurting our economy, and our fishing industry has been decimated over the years. And
so why not put it out of bill, and why attach it and risk a relief package to people who might live along the coastline or businesses along the coastline? Aren't you risking that relief package by attaching something to it that will be a problem in the House?
I don't apologize for fighting for the fishing industry and using every vehicle possible to assist a part of our economy. It's certainly a part of my district that is hurting right now. Just as people were affected by the Sandy relief, Hurricane Sandy. So obviously I want to see assistance for the fishing industry. Myself and several of my colleagues looked at that as a vehicle to where you're achieving both two very meritorious goals. At the end of the day, the amendment did not survive. Although it was added in the Senate, it was not part of the House package. And ultimately, I did vote for the House Sandy relief aid, and it's going to be important to Rhode Island. It means millions of dollars in relief aid, as well as for other parts of the country, especially New York and New Jersey, that were really devastated.
What to do about the fishing industry? We're hearing this week recommendations to cut cod fishing by 77% in some areas, but just draconian cuts for not only fishermen, but any industry that relies on fishing, so processing on down to people getting their fish and chips at their favorite pub. It's just across the board. I imagine you do not support the cut to those catches.
No, I don't support the cut to those catches.
So what do you do?
But I also recognize that if the fish stocks are in fact so depleted that it's threatening the entire existence of those fish stocks, that should trouble all of us. What has been the problem over the years is that really there's not a lot of confidence per se in the science, especially from the fishermen themselves, that those fishing stock estimates are in fact accurate.
That's a good question. Are you confident with that?
I am not confident that those fish stock numbers are accurate, but we need to have more, again, discussion and common ground here to find a way to have greater science, greater confidence in those numbers. If the fishing industry, and they're on the front lines doing the fishing, if they were more part of the process and more input, which I don't think they have enough input right now, it would at least give them confidence that, look, everyone is doing everything they can, and these are the best, most accurate numbers that we can get. I think the fishermen would feel that they're at least being considered in all of this, where right now I think they feel like they're shut out in a lot of ways. So I've worked with Senator Reid and Senator Whitehouse and Congressman Cicilline, my colleagues in Massachusetts, to try to bring them more into this and allow them to be more of the part of the process. Because the fishing industry, which is part of our heritage here in Rhode Island and New England, has been decimated, and again, these further cuts and reductions in catch limits is going to go even further to hurt that industry, and I'm very, very troubled about that. We're looking for ways to try to bring relief, and as you pointed out, I was part of the effort to try to add relief for our fishing industry, but it doesn't mean we're going to let up because that effort failed. We're going to continue to assist our fishing industry in other ways. You're
closely identified with the issue of cybersecurity. You've been working on that for years now. Yeah. And there were two interesting stories recently about it that I wanted to get your reaction to. The first was a couple weeks ago in the Financial Times. Basically, one of their columnists said companies are keeping quiet about how much cybersecurity, how many cyber attacks they're having, and that they should be, she suggested they should be speaking out more because people don't realize how bad it is. And then just today, the New York Times has a lengthy article about how when they started publishing stories about Chinese politicians, they started getting relentlessly attacked by hackers who they strongly suggest are attached to the Chinese military. I'm just wondering, when you see all of this, is this a bigger problem than people realize? And does this fit with what you expected would be happening as we go on, and they haven't been able to pass a cybersecurity bill in Congress?
Cyber attacks, cybersecurity issues are far greater than most people understand right now, and I am concerned that something more catastrophic could happen. Of course, everyone will understand how bad it is then, and we're trying to do everything we can to prevent that from ever happening. But it doesn't seem like a week goes by or a day goes by where you're not hearing about some major cyber attack or denial of service action that seems to happen from some parts of the world.
It's striking, though. The Times story very strongly suggests it's China and perhaps even the Chinese military, a military aspect to this.
Yeah, China's a problem in terms of how their cyber attacks or espionage is actually occurring on a daily or weekly basis. But it's happening. It's something worldwide. You've got, for example, you have cyber crime, cyber espionage, and then the area that concerns me is cyber attack. Most of us hear about cyber from the perspective of cyber identity theft or bank accounts being hacked. Espionage, what you don't hear a lot about is really the billions of dollars of intellectual property that's being stolen from our companies, and that's affecting our economic competitiveness. And then, of course, again, you have the issue that I do worry about is at some point our electric grid or other areas of critical infrastructure can be attacked and shut down.
Is that the more catastrophic thing you refer to? I mean, for us, the New York Times story was wild because we're in the media, and oh my goodness. But when you said you're worried about something more catastrophic, what is that? Is that them being able to shut down a power plant? Yeah,
and it clearly could happen. So critical infrastructure would be things like the electric grid, telecommunication system, our banking system, water and sewage treatment facilities, things that to make sure that we have clean water. All of those things are very vulnerable to attack, and it's been proven. Idaho National Labs, by way of example, did a remote attack on what's called a SCADA system. They kind of govern the safety systems on pumps and valves or generators that generate electric power. And so on the SCADA attack, in this particular case, they actually remotely attacked a generator that creates power and caused it to blow itself up, spin up to 100 or 20 or 30% of capacity and just blow itself up. And so the theory is that you could see such an attack on a major part of the country's electric grid and shut it down. God forbid it would happen in the dead of winter, and that could lead to not only damage to our economy, but also potentially leading to loss of life or injury.
Rhode Island could be losing one of its 2 congressional seats in 2020 due to shrinking population. Do you still hope to be in Congress at that time?
Well, certainly take it one election at a time, and I'm focused on doing my job, and I'm really, per se, worried about 10 years from now. But it is a concern that Rhode Island would influence.
Have you spoken with Congressman Cicilline about this?
I have not spoken with Congressman Cicilline
Probably
about this.
not a popular conversation.
Well, it's 10 years away. It wouldn't happen until 2022, I believe, would be the new would be the election that would be held that where Rhode Island could be left with only one congressional seat. But it would concern me in that Rhode Island would lose influence, and that it's one less seat that we have in Congress advocating for our state. But of course, this has been an issue for the last couple of the last two census, back in 2000, and then this past census. And so, the projection is now they're talking about it again. So it's
and
a
do you think you'll
possibility.
run in
Eventually-
2014?
Eventually, in 2014, I plan to run again.
All right. Congressman, I'm sorry we're out of time, but I thank you for joining us. Do you have any pick for the Super Bowl, real quick? 49ers Ravens?
I'm predicting that it'll probably be the 49ers.
Is that who you want? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, that's it. We're out of
49ers.
time. Congressman Jim Langevin, thank you for joining us on the program. For Ted Nesi and Ian Donis, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.